Welcome to the Utah Stories Show, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Richard Markosian. I'm the editor and publisher of Utah Stories magazine. Today on the program, we have an awesome guest. I'm so pleased to have him on because he's been a Utah Stories contributor for quite a few years. His name is Dr. John Librett, and I really like his take on our modern medical practices and systems because what we have going on is that there is groundbreaking, amazing research going on, but then there is a snail's pace for the major medical community to adopt the best procedures, the best medicine, the best practices. Dr. Librett's initiative is to help speed things up and to provide basically plans for cancer patients to receive better care and more of the best practices that are available. He did this with his own cancer when he developed it while he was a medical student. And overall, it's just a very fascinating conversation. Without further ado, my conversation with Dr. John Librett. On the program is John Librett. Thanks for coming on, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Rich.
So I met you a couple years ago when I was at a point where I was just like, man, I can't believe what doctors are telling their patients. I was just getting really jaded by the whole medical practice and how disconnected different medicine practices are. You know, I guess it's a great thing that, you know, your podiatrist knows so much about your feet and your heart doctor knows so much about your heart and your GI doctor knows so much about the GI, but it seems like they're all disconnected. They're not talking to each other well. And when you go in to, say, your general care practitioner, he's not informed about the latest and greatest with things like your microbiome and how much your gut health has to do with your overall health and well-being. And I met you at a time when I was just researching this stuff, and you pretty much confirmed all of the pessimism I had about our medical community. How did you get to where you are in both your practice and, you know, being a cancer survivor?
I guess I've always had an interest in tinkering with things and seeing how they work and taking them apart and fixing things, you know, ever since a little kid, and taking apart my mom's hair dryer and trying to figure out how that works, and then, you know, of course not being able to put it back together again. But over the years, that's just been some interest of mine. And then, as you know, I got cancer when I was in medical school studying evidence-based medicine. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of my deep dive into the healthcare system.
And describe evidence-based medicine, your specialty.
So at the evidence-based medicine can have a lot of interpretations of what is the evidence. What I was studying was epidemiology, biostatistics, numbers, and how to interpret clinical trial data and articles in journals such as the New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA, Lancet, whatever the case may be, peer review publication, science, and interpreting the science and how to interpret the science and make sense of the science.
It's basically when you talk about epidemiology studies, you're taking a broad, big study to try to understand how effective the medicine is. Correct?
Well, it could be an N of one, a study on one person. It could be, you know, if it's an ultra rare disease, it could be your population are 5 people. Yeah. Or it could be a study on 200,000, 300,000 people, and the statistics matter, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a power calculation, it's called, on the ability to find a difference in your kind of subpopulations, and the larger your sample, the easier it is to find differences. So there are studies that are huge, and they find a lot of significant difference. But the question is, are those practically significant, right? They might be statistically significant at this particular statistical level we call p-value, but
Hmm.
practically it's something that isn't something we can use in our daily life, if you will, right? So, or that doctors can apply. So, and then again, on the other end of the spectrum, you can have a study done on a very small number of people, and you can have something very significant of a discovery. And this
Yeah,
is
if it's
happening
even.
right now in genetics, right? So, um, and what we're finding out using mass spectrometry, the article I wrote in the wellness issue talks about the science and the technology we have now that's changing the landscape of what we consider as evidence.
Hmm.
So, but the point is my exploration into what are we using as information to make decisions in the healthcare space
Yeah.
was when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I was studying this space, and I had doctors on the other end of the other side of the ledger, if you will, who were applying their medicine to me, but at the same time I was studying the evidence related to my cancer, and they weren't matching up. What the doctors were doing
Hmm.
and what I was reading should be done wasn't the same, and so I started.
And it's because they were what, 10 years behind?
Well, medicine is right now the gap between the known and the applied known is 17 years.
Wow.
It used to be 300. So we talked
Oh
about
wow.
this the
Yeah.
story of Captain Cook and
Hmm.
the first kind of trial that we know of with the use of citrus
Hmm.
to prevent scurvy, but that finding wasn't translated into public health policy for 300 years. But it's still 17. So you and I, as consumers of medicine, and our physicians, are still generally 17 years behind the current evidence, FDA approved science.
And why is that? Why aren't our doctors adopting the latest and greatest practices more
Well,
quickly?
so there are latest and greatest practices being adopted, but not at the rate that we need to happen.
Hmm.
But generally, yeah, the 17-year gap is there's a number of reasons. Um, what insurance covers, right? So it takes a while for insurance companies to catch up with the science and determine that they're going to cover something. And usually, private insurance follows suit from the federal government, what CMS, Medicaid, Medicare covers, and then private insurance will look at that, and that's kind of an indicator of what they should be covering. And
And
the
because those
government.
dictates come from the federal government, which moves at a snail's pace, doctors just have to they'll probably know about it, but they just can't cover it because of insurance. Is that
Well, they won't provide the service because they're not paid for it,
yeah.
right? So that's one way, is that if it's not covered, then there's a disincentive for them to apply that science because they're not going to get paid to do that work.
Hmm.
So that's the second point, is the disincentive, the perverse incentives that insurance creates. So the first, why what are barriers to translation of evidence? Well, one is what the insurance companies cover, and the process of determining what to cover
Hmm.
is an issue. And then that leads to the physician being dictated. The physicians are, um, if you will, I don't being told what to do is the wrong is too strong of language. But they're following the what the insurance companies are covering, or what the hospital determines as that should be the quote standard of care for their patients.
So does the insurance company write the protocol that doctors follow more than the hospital? Like, do the insurance companies dictate to the hospitals the protocols that they have to go through for every patient?
So there's some, controversy in that space, right? So I brought the clinical practice guidelines for breast cancer screening for women.
Hmm.
Now we could talk about guidelines for prescribing certain medications. Now, does the pharmaceutical company, are they motivated to prescribe more pharmaceuticals? And if the answer is yes, are they motivated to get engaged in the guideline process to make sure that insurance is covering a particular drug, and are they motivated to help shape the um, the if you will the blood test range, whether someone's in or out of range that determines whether or not they should get prescribed a drug or not,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
this is when we talk about the healthcare system being broken, and we know, it's I don't think people have a very good understanding of the specificity of what's broken. But I'll
Mm-hmm.
say the third point is the consumer, you and I as consumers, right? So we have a significant responsibility as consumers of medicine to start, turning the ship, if you will, or shaping health policy. And the way that is done in other industries. So let's consider healthcare as the largest industry in the world, but we have, let's say, automotive industry. Okay, so the automotive industry is an industry, healthcare is an industry. So in the automotive industry, and also we can talk about the airline industry in a second. Well, in the automotive industry, if a car's brakes fail or accelerator goes without the person stepping on the accelerator and runs someone over, that is on the front page of every newspaper that a you know a car, a Tesla did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
One Tesla did something wrong. Front page news. But we have every day in healthcare, the number of fatalities equals 2 jumbo jets crashing every day due to
Wow.
medical error.
Wow. Yeah,
Okay,
that's insane.
so the problem is,
And that's not a person dying because they had a heart attack on the emergency table and they couldn't be saved. It's a medical error that could have been prevented. Is
by
that correct?
pilot error.
Yeah,
So
it's just
so
a,
it's
oh, whoops, I gave him the wrong meds. Somebody
well,
dies.
well, so I don't think the reaction is always like that, but the result is that someone got the wrong medication. I brought
And
my
how many people are on a jumbo jet? Like 2 jumbo jets. How many is that?
crashing every day with no survivors. I'd have to look at the latest statistics on, but I think the calculation was something like 300, like 700, 2 jumbo jets, 350 people, and I think something like that.
Wow.
It's a big number.
Close to
But the
1,000
point
people.
is, if one jumbo jet crashes,
Mm-hmm.
one jet crashes
Yeah.
with
You'd
people
hear
on
about
board,
it.
it's front page story.
Mm-hmm.
We have 2 crashing every day. Now the problem is when the consumer will not stand for jets crashing, right?
Mhm.
The consumer will not stand for a Tesla running over a person on its own. We as consumers will not put up with that. But in medicine, we don't have a concept of that this is happening. So we're not engaged in that process. So when we say, well, when I see people complaining about their physician prescribing an antidepressant instead of prescribing some integrative care prior to the antidepressant that may significantly improve depression,
Mm-hmm.
because antidepressants mask the feeling, right? So it's not as, doesn't treat the cause, treats the
Mm-hmm.
symptom.
Yeah.
They complain, well, why didn't my doctor prescribe some mindfulness or these other, why didn't my doctor run a test for high sensitivity C-reactive protein to see if I have systemic inflammation, because inflammation is being indicated as a risk factor for depression, or
Mm-hmm.
done some other blood tests related to what we know as far as, some types of blood diagnostics that could, or genetics that could predict cause of depression.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the doctor, and this gets back to the original discussion, right? Not covered by insurance. Doctor may not be informed of that information, but the consumer isn't seeking it, demanding it, doing something about it.
The consumer
So
doesn't know,
the
and
consumer doesn't know.
we're
So
left out in the dark because we trust our doctor. That's that statement. Trust your doctor is ingrained in our entire society and in the minds of most consumers. Right.
right. So so it's interesting. My wife's an attorney, and I had this perspective that, you know, attorneys and physicians wear robes. They both speak in Latin,
Yeah.
right? And yeah. So there's something
It's difficult to get certified.
there's something mysterious about that relationship. But again, I want to make it clear that the doctor is in this problem as much as you and I as the patient, right?
Mhm.
So my wife, who's an attorney, said, "John, attorneys would have never allowed a third party to dictate how much we get paid." So the doctors negotiated with the insurance companies how much the insurance companies would pay the doctors for their care,
Yeah, that's
right?
true. Yeah.
So so there's again, this gets back to the how the broken system and aspect of the broken system. But I want to the point is I want to impress upon the issue of that the consumer, you and I, don't know we know how to buy houses, clothes, food, cars, recreation, vacations. We're pretty skilled or fairly knowledgeable about being consumers of products and services. And if we're not, it's fairly easy to talk to your friends. If you're buying a car, what are the features you want? What's your budget?
Mhm.
Um, but when it comes to medicine, we don't know what we're doing. We're not smart consumers of medicine.
Mhm.
And so that's the third point is that when I got cancer, I was fortunate that I was in medical school studying medical science. And so I quickly became a smart consumer.
Mhm.
But that's what I see the big problem is that we just don't know how to purchase medicine, and so we don't know how to engage the system well. And we don't know what snake oil, what's real science, what is the evidence, what does evidence mean. Um,
So
that's
back up a little bit. When you found yourself diagnosed, what kind of cancer was it?
thyroid cancer.
Thyroid, and you obviously had a doctor at the time, right? I mean,
Oncologist?
your oncologist.
Yes.
You started working with him. At what point did you decide, okay, what this guy is telling me and the regimen and the protocol he has me on is not the very best and most effective treatment? How did you come to realize and
Mhm.
conclude that?
So I had three oncologists. So the first oncologist, our relationship lasted 30 minutes. I went into this oncologist's office to meet this oncologist about my cancer. Immediately, I felt there was something wrong with this person. They were, they had, they had level of anxiety, like I feel it, that was, that I wasn't, um, I don't know, grooving with or whatever you want to call it. There was just, we didn't have the connection there. As
Hmm.
it turns out, I found out many years later, this person was addicted to amphetamines.
Oh, really? Jeez.
Okay. So this was my first oncologist.
Wow.
I was in the meeting thinking, man, something's wrong with this guy.
And it's not
He's
because
had way too
you
much
have cancer.
coffee.
He's seeing a new cancer
Yeah,
patient.
here I
Yeah.
am, like, completely gripped out. And I'm sitting across the table from this guy who's like pinned to the ceiling.
Jeez.
That was like, oh, okay. Wake up number one
Hmm.
and I didn't know, it was many years later that I found out, but there was the love connection wasn't there.
Yeah.
There was something I could sense something was not right.
Hmm.
So then I ended up finding my next oncologist so I had a surgeon. I had a surgeon. I had a radiologist. You can kind of call them a primary care oncologist. They were like the coordinator. So I had three physicians that all at the same time that were coordinating or managing my care.
Hmm.
What would happen is they would bring to me the plan. So I brought out today, in fact, just in the mail today came a journal, and there are new guidelines on treatment options for HR positive and HER2 negative cancer. Okay, and that's not relevant right now what that means, but there are guidelines.
Hmm.
And one of the bullet points on the guideline is this, and this is, I'll get to my point. Early stage HR positive, HER2 negative breast cancer should be managed by selecting the optimal systematic therapy and individualizing surgical management. Okay, optimal systematic therapy and individualizing surgical management. My experience was that my doctors were going off of a template. They weren't individualizing the management of the cancer I had. They were saying, okay, here's the playbook for your cancer. This is what we do. First we do this, then we do this, then we do this, then we do this, then we do this, checking the boxes.
And that's dictated by the hospital and insurance company.
That's dictated by the hospice, what's called the standard of care, the mean, right? That's the standard of care. So if you have 100,000 people, you can't do 100,000 individualized treatments. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So you pick a mean, average, and you do that.
Yeah.
That's the standard of care. That's the standard. There's the standard deviations, but let's just say that's so. But in the meantime, I'm researching, deep diving on my cancer. I'm talking to cancer researchers around the country. I'm reading peer review articles on cancer. I'm attending grand rounds on cancer. I'm finding out very specific information about my cancer that would lead to what this selecting the optimal systematic therapy and individualized management, right?
Which you should be able to do with your doctor, but that's not even part of the protocol, right?
What patients don't have the capacity generally to do that,
Yeah.
right? Nobody's doing that for them. So you only have one side as the doctor who's typically delivering that standardized care, not the optimized individualized care. So the difference was what I started to your question is I started saying, wait a second, what I'm reading in terms of what's possible in the optimal systematic and individualized space was different than what you're saying from the standardized space, the standard of care space, the template space, right? So there was a disconnect. So, but to my doctor's credit, they would say, here's what we want to do. And I would say, well, what do you think about this? Here's what I just learned. And they would say, oh, that's really cool. Let's do that.
Wow.
And they would say, can you send me the papers?
Because this guy wasn't on meth.
Well, I had smart doctors.
Yeah, he was a good guy.
I mean, it's interesting because one of my questions was, I have the, chief of, I had the people at the top of their game, smart, compassionate, successful, but they weren't getting my cancer to that level of optimal, systematic, individualized care. But it's the system they are in that is a constraint to delivering that care, right? But I was a good partner because I was not getting this stuff downloaded off the internet on just randomly Googling thyroid cancer. I was deep into evidence-based medicine as a student.
Yeah. You had a special position where you could make recommendations that your doctor would assume are very valid because of what you're studying and your position.
Exactly, and I was providing them the evidence.
And most patients wouldn't have that
Exactly.
level of attention given to them by their doctor because the doctor would just be like, oh, well, yeah, you Googled that, so whatever.
Yeah, so there's a ton. We have, I think, 900 patients right now, and there's a lot of frustration among the patient population that their doctor doesn't listen to them, and I suppose there is a level of truth with regard to the doctor to say
well, it's kind of a tough spot you're in as a doctor because if everybody is Googling everything that they get,
right.
And how do you selectively decide what patients have legitimate ideas and which ones don't? Because you can't know all the solutions as a doctor. There's magic healing crystals. There's like bowls where you can make a tone, and that's that frequency of the tone supposed to. I don't know if that's true or if that works or not.
Right.
How does a doctor know?
Right, exactly. And that's why I was a good patient, because one
Because
of the doctors
he could
said,
trust you.
yeah, they said, John, you represent like less than 1% of the patients we get. I mean, because but with that said, the patient, there is a lot of work the patient can do. And I think that, we're doing this conference September 27th, this cancer conference. And I, the patient, we as consumers need to get smarter and at being consumers of medicine.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that insurance doesn't pay for our health care. We do.
Yeah.
Like when someone
But
says
I
insurance
guess
covered
I
it,
guess just to bridge that gap. So fast forward, you recovered from your cancer based on this really great system and protocol you came up for your own treatment, and then you realize that gap existed in the medical marketplace, and you've since filled that gap with survivor healthcare. Is that
right?
pretty much sum it up?
And by the way, the protocol I came up with is now the standard of care.
No kidding.
Yeah. So
That's what they'll use at any.
Last year, I found that out by accident, or I was looking up cancer research or cancer treatment or something, and the protocol I came up with, whenever back in 1989 or whenever that was, 1998, is now the standard of care.
Well, that's got to make you feel good.
That's pretty cool. Well, I mean, it's for the past, that
1998, so that only took 20 some odd years.
So that it was, and it would, by the way, it's right in there in the gap between the known and the applied known, right? I mean, I didn't pull this out of a hat. I created my protocol based on the evidence that was in the literature, right? And fast forward 20 years, now it's the standard of care. So that little use case shows that is also evidence that this problem, this diffusion of innovation issue, is a real problem, a real thing. You were asking earlier, why is this true? One of the issues is there's 500,000 articles published annually in medicine. 500,000. It's now just a fact that when a student graduates from medical school, what they've learned has been replaced with all new information.
Yeah.
It's kind of a joke to buy a textbook.
Yeah.
It's like literally, and I was talking with a doctor at the graduation, the medical student graduation, and we were chuckling, me and the physician, who's a very well-known, well-regarded physician, that it's kind of funny that doctors get stethoscopes as part of their graduation award. And that's, because I was noticing, because for me, a stethoscope is like 2 tin cans and a piece of string. I mean, you put these things in your ear, and you put this thing on, and you kind of try to imagine what's going on inside the person's body.
Yeah.
Where there's 500,000 biomarkers, and we have amazing technology to see what's going on inside the body. Yet the symbol of what other industry you wear, like I don't see accountants wearing abacuses around their neck to say, hey, look at me, I'm an accountant.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's also still the first thing they do when you go see a doctor. He starts listening to your heartbeat. He's like surfs around in there. I don't know what he's listening for. I don't know what he's doing. But he'll do that and take your blood pressure. And
there is the vital signs. There is one doctor told me once, I asked him why he used a stethoscope. He said to make a connection with the patient.
Okay.
Now he was
that makes more sense.
He's actually one of my doctors. He lives in upstate New York. His name's Michael Finkelstein. He's an amazing guy. He's a physician. He was a head of a hospital, and he left and bought a farm and lives on a farm and grows. He does his practice now on his farm and serves vegetables and teas. But I asked him about his experience leaving the hospital system and going into this experience. And for him, the stethoscope is more of a symbolism to a connection. Now you can get information using a stethoscope, and you can get information by tapping on your body cavity to listen to a response. You can hit someone in the knee with a rubber mallet and determine reflex. The
Hmm.
problem with that is by the time a rubber mallet determines that your reflexes don't work, you're already in trouble, right? But
Yeah.
if you what we should be you doing is we should understand what the rubber mallet is trying to detect in terms of disease
Hmm.
state and prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
We don't need a rubber mallet. So what the consumer needs is to say, my doctor just whacked me in the knee with a rubber mallet. Why did they do that?
Yeah.
What was the point of that? And is there a better thing that is there a better widget? Because the rubber mallet was invented before the steam engine, right?
Yeah.
So if you go down to the Marcosian Auto and they have a steam engine car, you're going to say, okay, but that's great.
Well,
You got
that's basically gonna tell the patient if you've got stage 4 lymphoma and your knee doesn't go up when I pop you with this mallet, then I know, right?
if I say if a rubber mallet determines you have neurological disease, you're already in big trouble.
Yeah, you're already
And so
almost Alzheimer's. You're gone. Is that the only thing it detects? I mean, is it like if you don't have any more reflexes, maybe your ligaments are torn. I
yeah,
don't
well,
even know.
it can it can have a number of uses, right? There's two different sides to it, and it can be used different ways. But the point being is, to me,
It's a very primitive
that's a
tool.
metaphor symbol of again the broken healthcare system, and the
Hmm.
problem from the consumer side is just going in and having the doctor whack you in the knee with a rubber mallet and going home and thinking, okay, that was my checkup.
Yeah,
I guess I'm okay.
yeah.
So
That's why I don't see
versus the consumer
doctors.
saying, you know what, huh?
So to back up to your story, after you recovered from your cancer, and then you started out into the medical field. What did you do after you got your your medical degree? And
So, but my cancer experience, another point though is that all through my experience were opportunities that I started to get insight into issues related to how we're treated as patients and how the medical system or the what I call the industrialized medical model views the patient and views illness. When the doctor came down and did rounds, the surgeon did rounds and asked me what did I need. My immediate response was I need to go home.
hmm.
I don't want to, it was like I need to go home and start to recover. We
Hmm.
don't heal in hospitals. We don't, they're very dangerous places, and my need to exercise, my need to hydrate, my need to eat nutritious foods,
Hmm.
my need to, get mentally strong. Those activities were not supported in the
Hmm.
hospital where I was being, quote, treated, right? So hospitals are coming around. You can now order organic foods and, they're building nice wellness centers, but it's still kind of an afterthought, right? So that's not their bread and butter.
Yeah,
And
you're just kind of stuck there in a bed,
you need to, yeah,
being told you this is recovery, and
and there's like risk management is going on, right? So I said I needed to get up. I need to go walk for a walk. I need to get my. I could taste the the chemicals that I was injected with prior to my surgery, right? And I felt like I needed to get up and start to exercise and get my blood flowing, get my oxygen flowing, get my lungs working, to get this stuff out of me, to start to get fresh oxygen and oxygenated cells and blood. And they were like, "Nope, you're not getting out of bed. You're staying in bed, and you're not moving." And I literally, the nurses left, and I was a triathlete at the time. I was fit. I mean, I had just had surgery and radiation, and I was about to have radiation, but I was felt fit. So I literally grabbed my drip line. I swung my feet to the side of my bed, and I grabbed my drip line, and I was, you're wearing that, they they dehumanize you, right? So you have to
Mm-hmm.
give everything. You become now a barcode. They take
Mm-hmm.
all your belongings. So I've got my gown on, my ass hanging out, and I snuck out past the nurses' station and went for a walk
Hmm.
and walked around the hospital. And I remember I purposely went past the nurses' station on the way back, just to, or like staring at me, like, "What are you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I needed.
Yeah.
Now, it used to be right that now with outpatient care, this was 20, little over 20 years ago. Now, there's a lot of surgical procedures that are outpatient. They want you out of the hospital
Hmm.
as quickly as possible, right? You're done with surgery, they throw you in a wheelchair and have someone pick you up and dump you in the car and send you home.
Hmm.
But again, back then, that was not the standard of care.
Yeah.
I had to push through those walls as well. And so there was a lot of issues that I learned that that led me to questioning the system, breaking it down, breaking it apart, looking at all the components, and then trying to rebuild something rational for patients and providers. And that's what I'm doing today. Right after I left my position, well, during my cancer experience, I was an employee at the state health department.
Oh, okay.
And so I was already working in areas of epidemiology and preventive medicine as a state health department employee. So I was able to translate those experiences into state, policy, state programs. And from there, I went to the Centers for Disease Control, where I then continued to expand and go deeper into these areas. And then after the CDC, I came back and went into the private sector to start to build health systems and specific to oncology.
Cool.
But prior to 2017, I wasn't in oncology specific. So I've been in oncology specific now for 2.5 years.
Oh, okay. And so you were in really the ideal position to actually change the policy because you were working at that position with the state. You actually could see what it was like at the grassroots and actually let more people know, hey, this is messed up.
Yeah, so I was doing it a lot more subversively, I would say, at the time, like
Yeah.
um, working within the system.
Cool. Well, we'll take a little break, and when we get back, we'll talk about what the survivor healthcare provides in the medical picture when for cancer patients. And we'll be back with John Librett. The Utah Story Show is brought to you in part by the Made in Utah Festival. Now, you got to mark your calendars and check it out. August 24th and the 25th, we are having a giant, massive party in the heart of downtown Salt Lake City where 200 craft vendors will come bringing their products locally made, locally crafted to Gateway in downtown Salt Lake City, where you'll be able to sample the best of craft cocktails, craft beer, everything handmade, hand woven, handcrafted from other vendors, food vendors, as well as product vendors. It's just an amazing display of all the incredible things that are made in Utah. So be sure to mark your calendars. And second of all, if you want to be both a part of the festival and a part of this program, then you should become a member of Utah Stories and Made in Utah. So what that involves is a subscription to our service of $9.99 per month or $99 for the entire year, where we will send you a VIP ticket with a $50 value to our upcoming Made in Utah Festival. And you will be part of our member community where you get to chime in on things that we cover, comment, and help us drive the best type of coverage that we can provide to you in mainly covering the things that help shape Utah. I mean, that's what we want to cover in this program, the things that are driving and shaping Utah and actually bringing on the people who make a difference in our community. So hope you get on madeinutahfest.com to reserve either your VIP ticket or go to utahstories.com to become a member of our Utah Stories Made in Utah community. back with Dr. John Librett, and we're going to talk about the solutions that he offers in the ecosystem that exists now for cancer patients and even people who are recovering from cancer. So tell me a little bit more about first the survivor healthcare, because I found that pretty interesting when you kind of integrate the better, more cutting edge care that's offered out there with existing doctors. And how are you able to do that without rocking the boat too much?
Okay, there's this. We have these terms, right? Eastern medicine, Western medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, traditional medicine, non-traditional medicine, holistic medicine, osteopathic medicine,
Mm-hmm.
alternative medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and
And typically, traditional doctors don't like to hear about too much alternative medicine. I think that they have a pretty sensitive radar when it comes to alternative, and they don't want to deviate too far from traditional. Is that accurate to say?
yeah. So there is a role the physician is needs to. We talked about the standard of care, and we talked about providing care that is covered by insurance and providing care that is dictated by a board at a hospital. But there's also the role of the physician as a responsibility, kind of a paternalistic responsibility to not do harm. Right, it's part of their creed. So they
Mm-hmm.
so they can't be prescribing things they don't know anything about that could cause harm, and they can't go outside of the realm of what their standard for evidence is,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a responsibility there that they have to toe the line on. But with that said, all these other forms of care, Ayurvedic, I mean, it's in the article we wrote for Utah Stories, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the history of medicine, if you and how the plant became alternative, right? So um, there what I determined was what in this space. Let's say we've got this we call traditional care or Eastern or Western medicine, right? Let's stick with Western medicine. So we've got this standard of care in Western medicine. That's
Mm-hmm.
acceptable, and if you have a compound fracture, you want to be in the United States, and this is the best place in the world to fix your compound fracture.
Mm-hmm.
There's this chronic disease space that's not so clear. What
Yeah.
and cancer is considered a chronic disease now. The and So there's this space of Ayurvedic, integrative, osteopathic, Eastern medicine. Some of these medical things have been practiced for thousands of years, and they work.
Mm-hmm.
And they work in this domain, but there is constraints to doing. There's not the funding for randomized control trials. There's not the funding for marketing. There's not the funding to cover it under insurance. So it sits out in this other space that sometimes is called alternative medicine, but I don't use that word. We use integrative care. So what we do is we want to work with the MDs, the primary care doctors, the oncologists, endocrinologists, cardiologists, neurologists, gynecologists. They're doing the standard of care.
Mm-hmm.
We want to partner with that care to provide the integrative care. So the mindfulness, the meditation, the nutrition, the acupuncture, massage, yoga, stretching. It could be all the way down to hyperbaric oxygen therapy, cryotherapy, supplements. So all of these things that can complement the work that's already going on,
Mm-hmm.
maybe prevent surgeries, right? Through different. So I just had a significant shoulder injury. First place I went was my orthopedic massage therapist who does. These are massages that they don't use oil. They sometimes hurt, but they're also doing lymphatic drainings, and they're helping the healing process that we also talked about in the article.
So you, by taking the idea that it's integrated, not alternative,
Right.
you're able to put it into the protocol and get acceptance
Yes.
from the mainstream oncologists and their whole
Yes. So
system
we're
that you're kind of
helping
locked
it.
in.
We're helping improve the outcomes they're trying to achieve.
And it's not a replacement for the cutting edge cancer care that the oncologist, well, not cutting it, I guess the standard protocol for what they're using, right?
Correct. Now, in some cases, it could be alternative to a decision to have surgery, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, from a back injury. So, if someone hurts their back and they go to a orthopedic doctor who gets paid to do surgeries, there's a saying, never ask a barber if you need a haircut, right?
Yeah.
So, if you go to a surgeon and ask if you should have surgery, there's a likelihood the surgeon's going to say yes for sure, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
not all, my orthopedic doctor, I trust to tell me whether or not I need surgery, but that's not. It's kind of like my first oncologist that was high on amphetamines.
Yeah.
You know, a doctor who graduates from medical school, there's a lot of doctors that go to jail that have MDs after their name,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
I know two of them.
okay, so you need to know so you want to know what we do. One of the things we do with the patient, we consider the consumer, is we want to know specifically about the diagnosis. We want to know who did the diagnosis. We wanted to know what methodologies were used to do the diagnosis. MRI machines are not the same. MRI people who are reading MRIs are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
You could go get an MRI from an old MRI machine that's not calibrated. It gives you an error, right? Get back to medical error. You could go to someone who's doing MRIs with a spectacular, cutting edge, state of the art MRI machine that's being run by a brilliant person. You could
Mm-hmm.
also go get an MRI from a knucklehead who just happens to own an MRI machine.
So you
There,
have to you're keeping track of who the the best MRI specialists
abs-
are and
abs-
who are not quite up to par.
not so much who's not up to par, but who I go to and who I would send all my loved ones to. So
Okay.
so what I do is I get an MRI from the patient and I send it to my radiologist to
Okay.
have them look at it and then make an interpretation from the images
Mm-hmm.
to say, are you seeing the same thing this other person saw?
Okay.
When my cancer was diagnosed, it was, through a microscope outside, and I don't know, maybe the pathologist just had a bottle of tequila the night before.
Maybe
And
you got the samples mixed up.
I mean,
Yeah.
who right? We have people who have come in with elevated PSAs. I want to know, have you ever, what's your history of PSA? Do you have
PSA.
prostate specific antigen, which shows whether you're at risk for or might have prostate cancer?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So an elevated PSA could be an error. We want to
Mhm.
do a retest at that lab, the same lab. We also want to look at, maybe you just happen to have you've had elevated PSA your whole life.
So it's kind of like you are examining as sort of a second, third party opinion and a specialist in integrative care. What's going on with this patient, and what are they also hearing back from their doctor, and you're able to kind of evaluate if that's how legit
as
that
part of the
diagnosis is.
team.
And yeah.
So getting back to my cancer experience, saying to the doctor, okay, here's some information I have, here's some information you have. Where's the truth, right? We talked about where can we optimize?
Mhm.
So that's what Survivor Healthcare started in that space, to take some pressure off the primary care providers, off the oncologists. When a patient says, I want to know about nutrition, I read something about intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
I read something about ketosis, ketogenic dieting. They can say, go to Survivor Healthcare. They will give you. We trust Survivor Healthcare to be
That's
able to
cool. So
fill that
you're not a
information gap.
thorn in the side of the doctor at all. You're a partner
And absolutely, because that's
who,
what I'm
because
saying.
they want the doctor wants to be able to say something to the patient who wants something that's different, and they just recommend you guys.
The doctor's constrained in this broken system as much as the patient is. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. There's a consumer provider partnership
Mm-hmm.
that is constrained in this broken system.
Mm-hmm.
There are also very, very bad doctors. There's that doctor that just got arrested for abusing 177 boys or something back in the Midwest somewhere or something.
Yeah.
I mean, there's very dangerous doctors. This is also, again, on the consumer side. You got to know if your doctor is driving the bus with you in it off a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you want to know. As I ask patients, do they like their provider, and then they say yes. I ask, what do you like about them? Because my surgeon can be the biggest SOB on the planet. I don't care. I'm not hanging out with my surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
I want the best surgeon in the world.
Yeah, you just need
But
him to be able to perform
my
what he's
primary
doing.
care doctor I call him, he's like a medicine man. And I had some, couple years ago, some chronic um, chest infection kind of thing during the inversion. I couldn't get rid of it. One of my doctors wanted to prescribe antibiotics, and I first called my other doctor back east to say what are some of the integrative things I can do to help heal my lungs before I go down the antibiotic path.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's what we're now. It's possible the antibiotic path is completely appropriate, but that should be the alternative,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We've got it upside down. The drug, the prescription should be the alternative to the healing process.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to reverse a high elevated A1C, right?
Why isn't that such a no-brainer? If antidepressants, we know they have all these terrible side effects. We know how hard it is for people to get off them, yet they're prescribed more in Utah than any other place on earth. Why isn't that the alternative to changing your nutrition and diet?
Well, in part, I don't know. Like the Utah thing is specific. We have one of the things is they're finding a correlation between elevation and depression.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a real thing. That's
Yeah,
a
there's
real
a lot of
effect.
external factors
So-
that could be
so-
at play, but
but-
I mean, mostly it's the doctors are prescribing it
So
because the
there-
patients are probably asking for it.
Exactly. So we studied this at CDC. So one of the problems is that the patient, if you tell the patient, here's what you need to do, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You need to learn how to sleep better. We need to study that aspect of your life. You're not
Yeah.
sleeping. Sleep is, again, in the article we wrote, paramount. We can't blow off not being able to sleep well. It is possibly the most important thing we can do for our health is sleep better.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, nutrition. Number 3, exercise. Number 4, mindfulness, some kind of mindfulness, meditation, relaxation, a real thing. I mean, I meditate almost every day, most of the time twice a day. When I get up in the morning and before I go to bed at night, that's a lot of work to stay committed to that.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, wait a second, can't you just give me a pill? Like, got to do all that?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds horrible. So
So it's just, I mean,
So that's
people just aren't
pressure.
educated, and we're watching TV and seeing a commercial for Wellbutrin, and wow, there's somebody who was sad and now they're happy. I could
it's
be
going to
that
cure
person.
me, but again, back to the consumer thing. No, it's masking it's addressing the symptom. Why are you depressed?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go. This is the epidemiology. This is clinical epidemiology. This is understanding the cause. This gets back to the article we wrote in this month's issue of Utah Stories on the wellness issue. Right, is that the disease can be random, but cure is deterministic. Right.
Yeah.
So let's look at what are the environmental triggers that's causing the depression.
Mm-hmm.
What is it in the environment? Environment could also be your cellular environment, right? Could be your molecular environment, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Genetic environment, external environment. This is what we call bio. So we do this at Survivor Healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, we do this now at the Cancer Wellness House. Survivor Healthcare is now the research arm. So we started this at Survivor Healthcare.
Hmm.
What we have now is this ecosystem where we have three entities. We have Survivor Healthcare, which is the original entity that started in this space, but now Survivor Healthcare is the research entity. We get contracts. We have a contract through CDC to do research to close the gap between the known and the applied known. So the research we're doing is not bench research. The research we're doing is reading articles, reading papers, talking to the experts. The research when I did when I had cancer is
Oh,
finding out what exists
yeah. Learning
out
what's
there
out there.
and then how to apply and then what's the quote product or service that we can translate that research into. Maybe it's already an existing product or service, medicinal mushrooms,
Hmm.
which I started to learn at the Made in Utah, your very first Made in Utah
Oh, yeah.
festival
Yeah.
down at Gateway, where I met the Whole Sun Wellness folks and started learning about medicinal mushrooms. And I met the bee, who started learning about honey
Yeah.
and bee products as an Ayurvedic. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, it's interesting because how my eyes were opened was my wife's from Bosnia. I've now made like 6 or 7 trips to Bosnia. You go to the farmers market there, and if you've got a problem, say you're depressed, say you're having a problem with digestion or you're having allergies, you see an herbalist.
right,
That's the default solution. That's the traditional healthcare. And if that doesn't work, then you go see your medical doctor who has access to all the same prescriptions we have over here. But the default is use a natural remedy or something that's from this amazing, huge, biodiverse ecosystem that
which is
exists in
where all our
nature.
drugs come from.
Yeah, which
This is
which
also
we're
in the article.
basically synthesizing through our pharmaceutical companies. And I saw that and I was like, that can't work.
Right.
That can't be as effective as my
Voodoo,
Robitussin or my
snake
my
oil.
NyQuil or my Pepto Bismol. And but then I try it every time I'm sick. My wife's got a different tea, and she told me how her father was treated for his kidney problems using honeys
Hmm.
that were pollinated by bees going to specific types of plants that would deliver the specific kind of pollen that would interact with the body in different ways. And but we're so uneducated in herbalism, we don't believe it, the majority of us, until we've seen it like I have with my own eyes and experienced it. So is the only method to get this more mainstream is to call it integrative? Is there do you see any other channels of making significant change?
Okay, so the ecosystem. So we have Survivor Healthcare, which is now the research arm, right? So we go out, we learn about honey. Well, there seems to be something, people are propolis and different, honey products, and there's some interest, and there's now we kind of it's like a radar, right? And the signal gets louder, and oh, people are like doing this honey thing. What's real? What
Mm-hmm.
can we extract, if you will, that can be an integrative therapy for, you know, lung health or immune function or whatever it is that seems to be a real effect.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the molecular, and then we go down to, because we're not going to get the clinical trials, right? So then we want to know what's the molecular response. Where can we find in the Journal of Mitochondria, the Journal of Cell Metabolism, or where can we find evidence that, okay, we know what the molecular properties of this honey is,
Mm-hmm.
of this particular honey product like propolis, and we know that bees use it as a way to protect the hive from disease.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that translate to a human? And we can go down to like mouse models, and so that's Survivor Healthcare.
Yeah.
Well, the Cancer Wellness House is the forward, is, if you will, the front-facing aspect of the ecosystem where we're interacting with patients with our health counselors,
Mm-hmm.
and we are. Um, and then there's a third entity called Survivor Health Solutions. Survivor Health Solutions is the entity that mostly does mental health therapy and manages survivor care plans. So that's the ecosystem. And then I am chair of the Utah Cancer Action Network, which is the state cancer coalition. So that's a place where we're having this conference in September. That is a place where I'm we're working on bringing together the traditional, if you will, the Eastern medicine and the integrative care and the Western medicine and the Ayurvedic medicine and these terms, and to have everybody understand what is real, what's snake oil, what's dangerous. I've had patients taking apricot kernels, which
Mm-hmm.
causes cyanide in the bloodstream, and
Wow.
that's very dangerous, and people die from that. And but there's there was like a theory many years ago that you can poison the cancer with cyanide, which you know has some scientific evidence, but you can't just take apricot kernels. You end up
And get
poisoning.
better from cancer.
Yeah, you end up get poisoning
But that's
yourself.
got to be a tough job because you're disseminating through all this information, trying to decide what's legitimate, what's snake oil. I mean,
Yeah,
there's got to be a lot of gray area where there's got to be anecdotal evidence to almost anything. So
right.
how do you keep your, I guess, your scientific hat on the whole time when you're talking about things like that?
So there are criteria that I use to determine the level. Part of it is how much does it cost. So if someone's charging $50,000 for a thing,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that thing is, there's a I want to know that's I want to be very clear that we're very clear on what the evidence is on what they're doing. There
Like
should be no gray
tiger
area.
balls they sell on the black market.
Well,
I've heard.
that would be one of that. So I would say that very expensive, very gray area. I
Yeah.
want no gray area if someone's going to spend 50 grand on a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a org company in, I believe they're in San Diego, Scripps, that has Peter Diamandis as part of this crew, and they have a $50,000 thing, and it's a real thing. It's
Really.
built by brilliant people, and it's MRIs, blood diagnostics, genetics. The value is there.
Mm-hmm.
I would have no problem. I would do it myself if I could throw down $50,000,
Hmm.
and I plan on doing it because once you spend that first 50K, then the following years
And it's what do they do
it's
for
it's
50K?
it's basically a full scan, if you will,
Just
of
complete diagnostic
yes, deep
diagnostic of
dive,
your whole system
top
and
to
body.
bottom.
Wow.
So
Huh.
so then there's everything from, and then you can go down to, okay, someone gave me a finger massager the other day. I was at a health fair on Sunday, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like you just like it was finger acupuncture. It
Mm-hmm.
was free. They handed me this thing. It was a swag item, and I was doing it, and it felt good. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Like but it was
Well,
free,
that
and it's not going to
to
hurt
me, it's
me.
like where
So,
it gets
but
so dicey is Chinese medicine because you can say it's thousands of years old,
yeah,
but then like literally they're killing like Bengal tigers for their balls because they believe they have medicinal value, and they'll put them in tea and they'll sell it for tons of money on the black market.
it's for I'm imagining for something like male testosterone,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
They're extracting this testosterone out of it. Well, um, hormones. We manufacture hormones and inject hormones, and there's this thing, bioidentical hormone, which I'm not so sure. I mean, a hormone is a hormone, I think.
huh,
But yeah, I mean, they get hormones from animals and inject those hormones into humans.
huh.
So it's possible that there's a real effect from that.
Hmm.
But why? But I don't know why is a tiger hormone. You know, I mean, the placebo. So
It's
there's a
easy to
whole nother
imagine why.
conversation about also the placebo effect. It's a real
Yeah.
effect. 30% of the population responds physiologically to a
Hmm.
placebo. That was during the war when they ran out of pain medication, and they were injecting saline into people, and the pain was going away.
And that
Whoa, and
happens thirty
what's
percent of the
that?
time.
So that's a real effect. So there is that. But my concern is doing harm
Hmm.
and spending money unnecessarily, and doing something that you think is going to work, which isn't going to work. And that's effectively doing harm, right? So if you're thinking, I'm going to do this and this is going to cure me, and it's not,
Hmm.
then that's a bad path to go down.
Yeah.
Uh, with that said, NIH has a Center for Integrative and Complementary Medicine. This is the gap. We talked about the gap between the known and the applied known. For me and my work and the stuff we're doing in our oncology ecosystem, there's plenty of evidence-based integrative care that we need to do a lot better on promoting and integrating into the system. That
Hmm.
we don't have to go to Tiger Balls to figure out if that's a real thing or not.
Yeah.
There's
Because
the
there's enough that's way more obvious, and
and
it's
and you don't have
less
to.
expensive or invasive, I guess.
And yeah, more prevalent, and you can go to Whole Foods, or you can go to Harmon's, or you could go to Smith's, or you can go to the Made in Utah festival. This
Yeah.
is what I want to do is get people access to products and services that are like, you know, orthopedic massage, acupuncture, exercise, ton of, intermittent fasting. There's a huge array of products and services that we can deploy now.
Yeah.
That is an education issue, an access issue. Yes, I'm out in the fringes studying. I would go and study this tiger ball thing, part just for fun,
Hmm.
but I spend my days reading the evidence.
Well, I got to ask you, with medical cannabis now legal in Utah, do you see that opening up a whole new area for autoimmune disorders where we can safely rely on medical cannabis for a whole myriad of problems dealing with autoimmune disorders, or is that something where it's a little bit too early for you to judge?
So I have been um, slowly, I guess, or somewhat passively monitoring the CBD and the THC. By the way, psilocybin,
Yeah.
the ketamine, LSD. This kind of, I would say, this psychoactive
Hmm.
space
Yeah.
that is starting to, they just had, I don't know, did they pass that? They decriminalized psilocybin in Denver. Or something.
Yeah.
It's still a criminal offense, but they basically said the law enforcement's not interested in this as a priority for
Hmm.
them or something, right? That just happened.
Yeah. It's
So,
and it's pretty amazing. I mean, I read a book about it by Michael Pollan, who's a pretty
yes,
mainstream
I
author.
read the Michael Pollan book.
Yeah, it was really quite incredible for what it could do, especially for people who are stuck in hardcore depression,
Right,
chronic
right.
depression. And I mean, to think that we're not using maybe one of the best tools that could be out there for it, because it's still not tested enough and proven enough, I guess.
Right. So the medical marijuana cannabis, partly I haven't been studying it deeply because it's been illegal. So
Yeah,
so
how
it's
can you
like
do it?
I'm
Yeah,
not gonna
it's still
I
a Schedule One
I
drug too.
can't tell people to do that, to do things that are illegal, right?
Hmm.
Um, with that said, we have cannabinoid receptors in the brain.
Hmm.
There seems to be gets back to the evidence space, right? So there seems to be evidence for a number of things, but there's also very important details. So people say, well, um, edibles help me sleep, but there's some evidence that it's similar to other sleeping medications where you don't get that deep restorative sleep,
Hmm.
right? So you wake up tired.
Hmm.
So it's not that it's not the silver bullet, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Um, there's also now research that the cannabis is incredibly powerful. The concentration levels, right? So there's oils and there's concentration levels. I was reading an article over the weekend. The statement was, "This isn't your grandpa's weed," or something, right?
Yeah.
So now we're starting to see a lot more cases of psychosis,
Hmm.
and
And it can trigger high THC cannabis, like close to 30%. If you have tendencies for schizophrenia,
right,
it can
that's the
actually trigger that.
exactly. So that's the psychosis piece. So
Yeah.
so I think that there's evidence that it has medicinal properties, but all medicines, herbs, supplements have side effects,
Yeah.
and so there needs to be approached consciously, and but yeah, I think that alcohol. If you look at it, if you look at there's a scale of toxicity, drug toxicity, and if you look at the toxicity of THC compared to alcohol, it's orders of magnitude difference
Yeah.
in the toxicity of alcohol, but
You mean
um,
alcohol's far, far more toxic?
right, does
Dude.
does a tremendous amount of damage, right? And
Hmm.
THC cannabis can approach those issues, but um, it's I don't haven't like I said, because it's been illegal and because it's still a space that we can't just charge forward on, at least in Utah.
Hmm.
I haven't studied it that closely in terms of now it's fully legal and there's dispensaries all over the place, and I need to start to be very smart when people ask me about dosing.
Yeah.
I've like I said, I've been looking at the milligram dosing and the different dosing levels, and what's called dose response relationships, and a
Hmm.
prescription. A prescription, when you get a prescription, it's how many times do you take it? Like 2 times a day, for how many days, at what strength,
Yeah.
right? So and this is actually in the article we wrote 2 years ago, which is in Utah Stories, in the wellness issue of Utah Stories 2 years ago, which is being very smart on the dose, on
Yeah.
the prescription,
Yeah.
right? And so that's where I think that people are going to have to. That's where I can contribute to this area, is understanding that dose response relationship, and what are you applying the CBD or the THC toward? What are you trying to treat?
Yeah.
What are you trying to solve for?
Yeah.
Ketamine is another one of those drugs that was just made legal. There's a form of ketamine that was just legalized that has to be administered by physicians.
Yeah. For
Um,
depression, right?
but it's like breakthrough. I mean, people who have severe depression,
Hmm.
trauma, go through these ketamine treatments, and they're cured. And this
Yeah.
is this is one of those areas where ketamine was this very fringy drug culture kind of thing.
Is that a synthetic compound, or did that come from a
Now
plant? Or
now ketamine is from a compound. I'm not sure. I did know. I did have it in. It's in there somewhere.
hmm.
But yes, but it's kind of like one of those things, um, like nutmeg or something, right? It's not nutmeg, but but um, but yeah, I mean, ketamine was very in the kind of dark in the dark web place, and now it's covered by insurance.
Google where ketamine's derived from.
So right,
Yeah.
so this is one example of something that was out there in the fringe, and now it can be prescribed by a physician, but there's a protocol. This gets back to the article from 2 years ago. There's a specific protocol that you can study to understand the application of it.
Yeah.
And then something interesting that we haven't talked about is the arbitrage in the cost of these things, right? So, you know, when it's versus covered by insurance versus not covered by insurance, and what the buying power is of the
Oh,
consumer.
well, you gotta know why the drug companies can't stand the cannabis revolution, because it's so inexpensive to grow. And then, the thing that was really dicey with the Utah law that they were trying to get their legislation wrapped around is they didn't want to allow the flower in the state. They didn't want to allow people to buy buds
Uh-huh.
because what other medication would you ever buy where you're buying a flower? I mean, but then the it was mostly people who were using cannabis for, I think, the adverse effects of cancer treatment, who were the patients for medical cannabis in Utah. They fought against it, and they got the flower allowed. But the biggest problem I see with it is that not only the dosing, but there are so many strains.
Right.
And to navigate that whole
Right.
world of like Delilah, Purple Kush,
Right.
Rockstar,
Right.
compared to, you know, these just these fancy fun names for it, but what are you really getting?
Right.
I mean, what is it that you're actually ingesting into your system at a molecular level, and how is that affecting your body? Because the cannabinoid system is so complex, it affects every patient differently.
Right.
So how do you really effectively
Right.
dose it, diagnose if that problem is suited for this strain, and with your DNA and how you respond to it?
Right.
It's just extremely complicated. And
That's my point, right? So that's why.
Yeah.
So until it's legal here, I'm not.
well, it is legal here if you get a recommendation card.
Oh, it is. So
Yeah, so you can go to another state with your recommendation card, legally buy it, and legally consume it in Utah.
I
if you-
thought it's for a specific type of disease, and that's rare. I know it was legal a number of years ago. It was
you have
passed
to
for
have
that
a
very
good
specific-
you have to have a note from a doctor that you have the legitimate problem that can recommend it for you.
So a number of years ago, that it was approved for a very specific type of seizure, right?
Yeah.
Pediatric seizure, and they said, okay, for that purpose only.
Yeah, for epilepsy in kids,
And
it's
now, but now and then, I thought they expanded the disease list, if you will. Whereas like California, when they first came out with their card, you could just go say you have generalized anxiety, and you get a card, and everybody
Yeah.
has some type of.
and you could put it that way.
So-
They have expanded the disease list
And it's
in
but
Utah.
it's still pretty constrained, is right.
Yeah,
Like,
you need to somehow prove, and that's proof.
Uh-huh.
You could say I have a terrible pain in
Got
my
it.
back and I need medical
so then
cannabis.
you get the card, and then you go to Las Vegas or wherever.
Yeah, go to a
and-
medical cannabis
and then
pharmacy.
and if
and-
they pull you over on the way back, as long as it's sealed and not open and all of that, and they let you.
Exactly.
You get
It's a get out of jail free
Got it.
card. That's
Okay.
all it is.
Oh, interesting.
It's when you get pulled over, get taken, and they find your cannabis. It's a get out of jail free card.
Mm-hmm. So the dosing, though, what you're talking about is still related to dosing. The type, it's still the dose, the prescription is still related to like the strength and what it's supposed to do. And I think that that's what it would be interesting to get into that. Maybe now that I should find out what the disease categories are. There are nested in the cancer space. There is purpose for things like nausea. I mean, if you're sleeping, maybe you're not getting deep REM sleep, but at least if you're sleeping, it's a start to learning how to sleep better.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some applications, pain management, like I said, nausea, appetite. There's some, I guess, that suppress appetite. There's some strains that's also as an appetite suppressant.
Well,
which is
I
interesting.
experimented a little bit with it because I was going to Moab a lot. I thought I'd stop at the store, see what's available. What I didn't
The
like
store
in Colorado.
You
Yeah.
mean, Cortez, is it?
Well, the one I found was
Or-
recommended by a couple of elderly couple who had very legitimate reasons to be using it, and they recommended one in Ridgeway, Colorado.
Okay.
And the guys behind the counter were super legit in that town in Ridgeway, Colorado. And I got a very high CBD flower, and I tried it for my asthma. And I found it to be awesome.
Right.
I didn't have to use my inhaler all winter because I had this. But then I tried to find the same strain in just over the border in Parachute, and then I think I tried Grand Junction. They had never heard of it.
Interesting.
It's called Delilah. They hadn't. And so it was like
Oh,
And
that's a
then, oh, but
problem.
here I got this one that's just like Delilah. It wasn't at all just like, it wasn't
Interesting.
high CBD. It was high THC. I don't like THC.
Uh huh.
I don't like to feel high.
Uh huh.
I don't like to feel, I get paranoid.
Uh huh.
And so
Right.
nothing
That's
else
just
worked for me but that one strain. And whether or
interesting.
not I can ever find that strain or that name
Right.
matches the next product they produce with that same name,
Huh.
I don't even know. So,
That's yeah. That's a big problem. So can you get? So what did you do? Do you
so if I go back
get?
to
Can
Ridgeway,
they
which
can't
is
mail it to
close to
you, right?
Telluride, it's a long drive.
Right.
It's like 8 hours from Moab to get
Uh
there.
huh.
If I go all the way back there and I see those guys again,
Uh huh.
and I tell them back in January I bought
Right.
this, maybe I could get the same product, but I
Or
don't even
find the
know.
source. Go to the manufacturer,
Yeah,
if you will. Right.
yeah.
Like somewhere in Humboldt County,
But
California.
I
Who
mean,
knows?
I think on the medicinal side,
Uh
because I
huh.
went to a recreational, I'm sure they keep track of it much better.
Uh huh.
And
Well, they would have. Do they keep a record of what you bought, and would they? You would have to know. Would they? So with the card, at least, it
yeah,
seems like they
it would
would
legitimize it all.
associate the product with your name or your ID. Is that happening?
I don't know.
Yeah, that would
I
be
can't
interesting.
say because we've never been to a legit medical cannabis
Uh huh.
dispensary, and so, but I think that a lot of people are now really engaged with medical marijuana in Utah because you can get that card,
Uh huh.
and people know where to go,
Uh
what
huh.
doctors to go to get them,
Uh
and
huh.
so it's an interesting topic, especially related to cancer treatment, because I know that was what spearheaded it, especially in Utah.
Yeah, I'm interested in. There's a program called MAPS, a national program looking at psychedelics for therapy,
Yeah.
and it's very interesting. Again, this is one of those things. Thousands of years. Ayahuasca ceremonies, and I read when I was getting my degree in medical anthropology. We studied different tribes using, um, you know, different types of medicinals or these kind of um, trips or whatever you want to call them, to pass through, heal, resolve
Yeah.
these problems that are causing the individual all this suffering. And it's like you go through this hellacious experience, and you come out the other side like cleaned off, if you will, or shedded of all these things. And it's there's evidence that this is a real thing, a real effect.
Mm-hmm.
And but again, getting back to the kind of theme of the conversation is then you've got the system of insurance systems and standard of cares and needs for evidence and clinical trials, and that creates the constraints to accelerate the research, the understanding, the proof, if you will, of the and then of the outcomes. And
Yeah.
it's
There's so many
it's
systems
it's
in
a great,
place
but it's
that.
been my for 25 years it's been the space I've lived in, which has been a riot, fascinating, right? It's so fun to get in this space and then go back to, we just did with the oncologist, we just developed a new product for cognitive impairment. So chemo brain, right? So I'm looking over our data last year, see a lot of our patients reporting cognitive, they're reporting cognitive impairment. They're using terms like chemo brain, chemo fog,
Mm-hmm.
inability to concentrate, confusion, different things that are describing cognitive ability.
Mm-hmm.
So in survivor healthcare, I start doing the research. But what is this? What is going on? Is this a real disease, if you will, diagnosis? And in point of fact, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cognitive impairment, and we can diagnose it. And so then I went back to the oncologist and said, okay, what are you doing for chemo brain? What's your intervention? What's your how? And as like we let them know, that they ask us about it, and we say, yeah, it's a side effect,
Yeah.
but
They
it's
probably like, yeah, we know what happens, but.
it's a thing. So we created a protocol to assess on 5 levels of cognitive domains, five levels of cognitive impairment. Very quick assessment. It takes 20 minutes. The standard of care is a 5-hour grueling day of diagnostics. This is this is draconian medicine. This is, in my opinion, this is equal to the stethoscope and the reflex hammer. So you put
Hmm.
this person who's already suffering through cancer treatment through 5 hours of grueling diagnostics when we can do it on a computer in 20 minutes and get good enough data to be able to prescribe things to improve cognitive impairment.
What kind of things you prescribe?
So interesting enough, a lot of it comes out of the athletic training world. So motor speed, so speed, right? So throwing a tennis ball against a wall and catching it with your other hand is something that's done in the athletic domain, right?
Hmm.
High hand coordination. Well, that's perfect. That's a perfect exercise to improve cognitive health. So there's a
Huh.
number of exercises you can do. Cognitive behavior therapy is a strategy that is approved in the clinical practice guidelines. So there's an organization, we talked about clinical practice guidelines. So there's organizations that are the kind of set out the gold standard for guidelines for treatment guidelines. So there are treatment guidelines for cognitive impairment.
Cool.
Cognitive behavior therapy is one of those things that works to improve cognitive health. And there's some drugs that are being experimented with, modafinil being one of them. Modafinil is a drug that's been typically used for narcolepsy, and it's considered, it's being used also at Berkeley and other places as a smart drug.
Hmm.
It's a pretty interesting drug. The Air Force experimented with it with their fighter pilots, but it improves cognitive abilities,
Hmm.
and that there's some evidence that that can be prescribed as an alternative or integrative. For particularly, we see a lot of young cancer patients who have jobs and families and complicated lives, right? And the because cancer is being diagnosed earlier and people are living longer. It's not just retired people who are sitting at home watching soap operas or whatever. I mean, these are
Hmm.
people who are in their 30s and 40s who are in the middle of it, the thick of it, trying to manage a lot of complexity
Yeah.
and have cognitive impairment. So we then integrate these things to create a new treatment plan and a diagnostic, a new product or service for cognitive impairment.
That's great.
So that's it's kind of part of the process. So Survivor Healthcare does the research, we create the product, we deliver it up to the Cancer Wellness House.
Hmm.
Cancer Wellness House does the diagnostic, does the testing, does the integration, and then we have Survivor Health Solutions that works with the patient in the mental health space.
Cool.
So that's the ecosystem in
That's very
action.
cool. Well, I think this is probably a good time to wrap it up. Did you have anything else you wanted to recommend or add, or yeah,
I
read
can
John's article in Utah Stories this month. Let about food as medicine, and just basically how to navigate the whole medical world and become a better medical consumer. I think it's a great advice. Just in the time that I met you 3 years ago, and really understanding that I had to take it upon myself to take charge of my own health. You just feel so much better when you don't become a victim of the medical establishment or trust that everything that your doctor says is going to be true or the very best treatment. There's always safer, alternative, integrative methods out there that can produce better outcomes, and I think it's cool that you've stumbled upon so many of those. And where can people go to get more information about what you guys offer?
So I would say the first stop would be if it's a cancer specific thing at the Cancer Wellness House,
Okay.
and you can go to our website, cancer-wellness.org. You can email us, Eric at cancer-wellness.org. Eric will do the intake, we'll do the interview, and start to set up the process to get integrated into the system.
Hmm.
Um,
Cool.
and we have the conference is in September on the 27th, so we'll be we have the Facebook page. I think going to the Cancer Wellness House and following it, we post a lot of our activities on Facebook, Instagram.
That's the best way to get
I think so,
access to all the information and everything.
to get updates on the things we're doing.
Yeah.
But to get into the system would be to set an appointment, meet with Eric, do the intake. We do it online. There's a process that we go through. That's that we've been working on for the last couple of years. It's been funded in part through CDC, Centers for Disease Control, to help create a system.
Cool.
Yeah, that's I think that's the way to get started.
Well, sounds great. Well, thanks for coming in, John. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Rich.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to the Utah Stories Show. Next time on the program, we start a new issue and a new month. We are rolling out our farm issue. So we'll be talking to farmers about food and agriculture for most of the month. So be sure to be a part of the show, and you can help us grow in one of three ways. First of all, you can, if you're watching us on YouTube, obviously you can like the video. If you like it, you can subscribe to it. If you subscribe, be sure to click on the bell icon so you actually know when we're posting new material. If you are into other social media like Instagram or Facebook, go out and share the episode with your friends. We would really appreciate that. And also, if you're on iTunes, if you wouldn't mind giving us a 5-star review, that is very helpful because it helps more iTunes listeners know that we actually exist. And then last but not least, we have opened up Utah Stories and Made in Utah to memberships. And what that entails is that once you are a member of the Utah Stories Made in Utah community, you get a ticket to our VIP event, one of our VIP events, which happens, we'll put on about 3 throughout the year. We have one coming up in August, which is sure to be amazing, where you can sample food from local restaurants, sample craft cocktails, craft beer, and you can join our group of members where you can chime in about the important issues that we cover. So for $9.99 per month or $99 for the entire year, you can become a member and be a big part of what makes Utah Stories great. So again, thanks for watching. This is Rich Markosian signing out.